"What are you doing with my daughter?" Julian Harrison's shout cut through the air like a whip. He stopped dead in the entrance of the kitchen, eyes bulging. The Italian leather briefcase slipped from his hand and crashed against the marble. In front of him, Emily Rivers, the domestic employee hired 6 months ago, cleaning the counter with yellow gloves while breastfeeding his 6-month-old daughter. Amber slept peacefully, wrapped in a worn baby carrier. Her tiny fists rested open for the first time since her birth. The silence that filled the mansion was something Julian had forgotten existed. For half a year, that girl had cried without rest. She had rejected every bottle, every embrace from the most expensive nurses in Manhattan. The pediatrician spoke of colic, of patience, of medications, but never of this, an invisible employee giving her what no money could buy. Emily looks up. Her brown eyes meet his, full of a serenity that disarms any reproach. There's no defiance in her gaze, only a maternal certainty that whispers, "It was what she needed." Julian opens his mouth, but the words have evaporated. His silk tie tightens around his throat. His world of rules and social protocols has just collapsed before a scene that defies everything he thought he knew about his own home. When was the last time he heard this blessed silence? If this story already touched your heart in this first minute, subscribe to the channel. Here you'll find stories that heal, inspire, and make you believe in human goodness again. A year and a half ago, this same kitchen was the heart of a family. Teresa Harrison, with wavy brown hair and contagious laughter, prepared her famous mac and cheese casserole while humming jazz standards. Julian would arrive from work and find her dancing barefoot on the cold marble. "How's my princess?" he'd ask, caressing her 8-month belly. "Restless, like her daddy," Teresa would respond, taking his hand. "But I think today she wants to meet you." That was the last complete conversation they had. Amber was born by emergency cesarean at 3:17 a.m. Teresa held on for 6 hours after delivery, enough time to hold her daughter once, enough time to whisper, "You're going to be loved, my darling. Daddy will learn." Enough time to split Julian's world in two. Before Teresa and after the void. Now, 18 months later, the 3-story mansion in the exclusive Upper East Side feels like a mausoleum. The paintings remain in their place, but no one looks at them. The dining table is set for one person. Amber's toys remain in their boxes, because every time Julian tries to play with her, the girl cries as if sensing his desperation. "You don't hold her correctly, mister." "Harrison," the first nurse had told him, an older woman with a Boston accent. "Babies sense when someone is nervous." The second nurse, younger, was more direct. "The child needs routine. You work too much." The third, a lactation specialist recommended by the most expensive pediatrician in the city, gave up after 2 weeks. "Some babies are more complicated. Maybe she needs reflux medication." But Julian knew it wasn't reflux. It was something deeper, more painful. His daughter rejected him because he didn't know how to love her. He had built a pharmaceutical empire with 847 employees, had closed million-dollar contracts in 3 languages, had given conferences on business leadership. But he didn't know how to console a 6-month-old girl. The office became his refuge. He'd arrive at 7 a.m. and leave after 10 p.m. Weekends he'd review financial reports while Amber cried in her crib, attended by the nurse on duty. "It's temporary," he'd tell himself. "When she grows up, it'll be easier." But each day that passed, the distance between father and daughter grew deeper. Each cry from Amber was a reproach he didn't know how to answer. Each smile that didn't come was a door closing forever. The house had lost its soul. The employees spoke in whispers, as if they were at a permanent funeral. Meals were served punctually, but no one enjoyed them. The gardens were perfectly maintained, but no one walked through them. Until Emily arrived. She arrived on a Tuesday in October, recommended by Manhattan's most prestigious domestic staffing agency. Julian barely looked up when they presented her resume. Emily Rivers, 31 years old, experience in residential cleaning, excellent references, full availability. What the resume didn't say was that Emily had lost her own child a year ago. Matthew, 8 months old, had died from a respiratory infection that public health doctors couldn't control in time. Her breasts still produced milk that her baby could no longer take. Her heart still woke up every dawn expecting to hear cries that never came. When Emily heard Amber's cry for the first time, something moved in her chest. It wasn't professional curiosity or polite compassion. It was recognition, the cry of a baby who needs something no one knows how to give her. But Julian knew nothing of this. For him, Emily was simply another efficient employee who kept his house in order and didn't ask uncomfortable questions about why a millionaire man lived like a ghost in his own home. But what would happen when that invisible employee began to do what no expensive nurse had achieved? Emily arrived at 7 a.m., exactly when Julian left for the office. They'd cross paths in the marble foyer, he in his $3,000 suit, she in her navy blue uniform and white rubber shoes. A polite, "Good morning," a nod of the head, and each continued their way. But as soon as the door closed behind the BMW 7 Series, the house changed. Emily didn't just clean, she listened. She listened to Amber's crying from the upper floor, listened to the nervous steps of the nurse on duty, listened to the heavy silence that filled every corner like toxic fog. The third week, while polishing the glass doors of the main living room, she heard the British nurse talking on the phone with the agency. "No, it's not a normal baby. She cries constantly, won't accept the bottle, rejects physical contact. I think she needs psychological therapy." Emily kept cleaning, but her ears sharpened. "Yes, I've tried hypoallergenic formula milk, bottles of different shapes, classical music, massages. Nothing works. The child simply doesn't connect with anyone." That afternoon, when the nurse went out to buy medications, Emily went up to Amber's room. She found her lying in her Danish-design crib with open, glassy eyes, fists clenched, body tense like a spring. She wasn't crying, but her breathing was agitated, shallow. "Hello, little one," Emily whispered, approaching slowly. "What's wrong, my love?" Amber turned her head toward her voice. Her eyes, the same light blue as her father's, fixed on Emily's with an intensity that took her breath away. For a moment, the two beings who had lost what mattered most looked at each other in complete silence. Emily extended her index finger toward Amber's little hand. The baby grabbed it with surprising strength, and for the first time in weeks, her muscles relaxed. "There you go, beautiful," Emily murmured. "I'm here now." From that day, every time the nurse went out, Emily visited Amber. She didn't hold her, she knew it wasn't her place, but she talked to her. She sang lullabies she had sung to Matthew, told her wordless stories, calmed her with that soft voice that only mothers who have known loss possess. And Amber responded. Her cries became less frequent when Emily was near. Her sleep was deeper when she heard her footsteps in the hallway. She even began to take a little more from the bottle, as if this woman's presence gave her the security she needed. But the nurses didn't notice, or didn't want to notice. To them, Emily was just the cleaning woman. Her connection with the baby didn't fit into their professional protocols, their university degrees, their scientific methods. The revelation came on a Friday afternoon. The nurse on duty had left early, claiming a family emergency. Julian was in Boston closing a contract. Amber had been crying non-stop for 2 hours, and nothing seemed to calm her. Emily climbed the marble stairs with her heart racing. She found the girl red from crying so much, with swollen eyes and a hoarse voice. She held her for the first time, feeling her warm, trembling little body against her chest. "Calm down, my darling," she whispered, rocking her gently. "Calm down, it's over." But Amber kept crying. Her little hands clung to Emily's uniform as if she were drowning. Her mouth searched for something the bottle had never given her. It was then that Emily felt the dampness on her blouse. Her breasts had begun to leak milk upon hearing the desperate cry of the child. Her body, which had been in mourning for Matthew for a year, recognized the signals of a baby hungry for love as much as for nourishment. She looked at herself in Amber's room mirror. Her eyes were full of tears, but also of a determination she hadn't felt in months. Without thinking twice, she unbuttoned her blouse. "Come here, little one," she murmured. "Let me take care of you like no one else can." When Amber latched onto her breast, the silence that filled the room was like a miracle. For the first time in 6 months, the girl stopped crying completely. Her breathing calmed, her muscles relaxed, her eyes closed in a deep peace that not even the most expensive medicines had managed to give her. Emily settled into the rocking chair by the window, with Amber sleeping in her arms. The afternoon sun painted the room golden, and for a moment she felt complete again. She wasn't this child's biological mother, but her heart made no distinctions. Love doesn't understand legal papers or employment contracts. She stayed like that until she heard Julian's BMW entering the garage. She quickly buttoned her blouse, placed Amber in her crib, where she continued sleeping deeply, and went down to finish her tasks as if nothing had happened. But something had changed forever. Amber had found what she needed, and Emily had found a reason to keep living. But what would happen when the world discovered what had occurred in that golden room? The discovery came 3 weeks later, exactly as we had seen in the kitchen. Julian found Emily breastfeeding Amber while preparing dinner, with the child wrapped in a homemade carrier, completely serene. But what followed that moment of shock wasn't what Emily expected. For the next 2 days, Julian said nothing. He'd arrive from work, see his daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib, and stand in the doorway for long minutes, as if he were witnessing a miracle he couldn't understand. Amber had changed. She no longer cried constantly. She took her bottles without resistance. She smiled when she saw Emily enter the room. At night, she slept 6 hours straight, something she had never achieved before. "It's extraordinary," he commented to his secretary over the phone. "It's like she's a different child." But he didn't directly relate the change to what he had seen in the kitchen. His logical business mind sought rational explanations. Maybe the child had outgrown the colic. Maybe it had been a matter of time. Maybe the vitamins the new pediatrician had prescribed were finally working. The bomb exploded when Dr. Helen Lawson arrived. Helen had been Teresa's best friend during college. Child psychologist, specialist in early trauma, director of a private clinic on the Upper East Side. A 45-year-old woman, elegant as a magazine model, cold as a medical diagnosis. Julian had called her for advice, worried about Amber's emotional well-being. "I need you to evaluate my daughter," he had told her. "There have been recent changes I can't understand." Helen arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, with her Italian leather briefcase and her professional attitude. She wore an impeccable beige suit, 4-inch heels, and a smile that didn't reach her gray eyes. "Julian, darling," she greeted him with 2 air kisses. "You've lost weight. Grief is still affecting you, isn't it?" They went up to Amber's room, where Emily was changing the child's diaper. The scene was completely innocent. An employee doing her job, a cooperative baby, a normal afternoon in a wealthy home. But Helen had the trained eye of someone who had studied child behavior for 20 years. She noticed the way Amber followed Emily with her gaze, how she calmed instantly when she heard her voice, how she extended her little arms toward her when she saw her moving away. "Interesting," she murmured, taking notes in her notebook. "How long has this employee been working here?" 6 months, Julian replied. "Why?" Helen didn't respond immediately. She observed for another hour, asking apparently casual questions. Who fed the child? Who consoled her when she cried? Had he noticed any unusual behavior from the domestic staff? Julian answered honestly, not suspecting where the questions were leading. Until Helen went straight to the point. "Julian, I need to ask you something delicate. Have you observed if this employee has had intimate, physical contact with your daughter?" "Intimate?" Julian frowned. "I don't understand what you mean." Contact that goes beyond what's professional. That she holds her unnecessarily, kisses her, that feeds her in unconventional ways. Julian's heart stopped. The image of Emily breastfeeding Amber in the kitchen returned like a bright, guilty flash. Suddenly he understood why Helen was there, what she was looking for, and what had been occurring under his roof. I saw her once, he admitted slowly. I thought maybe, my God. Helen brought her hands to her chest as if she had heard a murder confession. And you did nothing? You didn't fire her immediately? But Amber was fine, Julian defended himself. For the first time in months, she was calm, sleeping, smiling. Exactly. Helen closed her notebook with a sharp snap. That woman is creating a completely inappropriate emotional dependency. She's confusing your daughter, making her believe she's her mother. This is a serious breach of trust. Helen's words fell on Julian like icy stones. Abuse, dependency, inappropriate. Suddenly, what he had seen as an act of care transformed into something dirty, dangerous, unforgivable. A domestic employee has no right to breastfeed her employer's child, Helen continued, pacing the room like a prosecutor in a trial. It's a violation of professional boundaries, emotional manipulation, and possibly even a crime. Do you know if this woman has children? If she's psychologically stable? If she's not projecting her own deficiencies onto your daughter? Julian realized he knew nothing about Emily. He didn't know her story, her motivations, her losses. To him, she had been simply an efficient, invisible, dispensable employee. You have to fire her immediately, Helen concluded, and you need to document all of this in case it's necessary to take legal action. A woman who does this without permission is capable of anything. That night, after Helen left, Julian called Emily to his study. She came down the stairs with her head high, but trembling hands. She knew this moment would come sooner or later. Mr. Harrison, she began before he could speak. I can explain. There's nothing to explain, he interrupted, his voice cold as he hadn't used since the worst days after Teresa's death. What you've done is unacceptable. Tomorrow you pack your things and leave. I'll pay you the full month, but I don't want to see you around here anymore. Emily nodded slowly, tears running down her cheeks without making noise. Can I say goodbye to her? No. The answer came out like a whip. Don't go near my daughter again. That was the longest night of Julian's life. Upstairs, Amber cried like she hadn't in weeks. The crying pierced through walls, floors, reached his study like a painful, uninterrupted reproach. At 3 a.m., he went up to see her. He found her red from crying so much, with a hoarse voice, searching for something that was no longer there. When he tried to hold her, she arched and cried harder, as if his presence hurt her. For the first time in 6 months, Julian wondered if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. But was it too late to make it right? Emily left on a Thursday morning, taking only a small bag and the weight of a goodbye she never could give. She left an envelope on the kitchen table with her name written in shaky handwriting. For Mr. Harrison, when he's ready to understand. Julian found the envelope that afternoon, but didn't open it. He stored it in his desk drawer, along with bills he didn't want to pay and letters he didn't want to read. Some truths hurt too much to face immediately. Amber got worse each day that passed. The nightly crying returned, rejection of the bottle, constant muscle tension. The new nurse, recommended by Helen, was a competent professional who followed all protocols to the letter. But protocols couldn't fill the void Emily had left. It's normal, Helen assured him during her weekly visits. The child is detoxifying from that artificial emotional dependency. It's like withdrawal syndrome, but it will pass. Give it time. But time didn't heal anything. Amber lost weight. Her eyes lost the brightness they had gained during those precious weeks. She returned to being the inconsolable baby who rejected all contact, all comfort, all show of love. One night, after 3 weeks without sleeping more than 2 hours straight, Julian broke. He found himself standing in Amber's room at 4 a.m. with his daughter crying in his arms, wondering if Teresa would have known what to do. That's when he remembered the box. Teresa had left a carved wooden box in their bedroom closet, with a note attached. For Julian, for when he feels lost. He had never had the courage to open it. The pain had been too intense, too fresh. But that dawn, with Amber crying and his sanity hanging by a thread, he went down to the closet and took out the box. Inside were photos of Teresa during pregnancy, ultrasounds of Amber, and 3 sealed letters with different dates. The first said, "To open when Amber is born." The second, "To open when Amber turns 6 months old." The third, "To open when you need a sign." He definitely needed a sign. With trembling hands, he opened the third letter. Teresa's handwriting, slanted and elegant, filled 4 pages of ivory paper. It began like this: "My love, if you're reading this, it means something went wrong and I'm no longer with you. It also means you feel lost, that you don't know how to be the father Amber needs. That fear is paralyzing you the same way it paralyzed me so many times." Julian felt the world wobble. Teresa had known. Somehow she had sensed she wouldn't be there to guide him. "I want to tell you about a woman I met during my pregnancy. Her name is Emily Rivers. I met her at the hospital during one of my checkup visits. She was there with her baby, an 8-month-old boy fighting a respiratory infection." Julian's heart stopped. Emily had had a child. We talked for hours in the waiting room. She told me what it was like to be a single mother, how she had learned to trust her instinct when doctors had no answers, how a mother's love can be more powerful than any medicine. She was the one who taught me not to be afraid of my maternal instincts. The letter continued, revealing a world Julian had never known. Emily lost her son a week after we met. I was at the hospital when it happened. I saw her hold Matthew for the last time, singing him a lullaby while he said goodbye. I've never seen so much love and so much pain in the same person. Julian had to put down the letter and breathe deeply. Emily had lost her child. She had experienced death in the cruelest way possible, and still had found the strength to care for Amber. After the funeral, we stayed in touch. Emily would visit me sometimes, help me prepare Amber's room, calm me when I was afraid of not being a good mother. When the doctors told me there were complications with my pregnancy, she was the first person who told me, "Everything will be fine, because love always finds a way." Julian, if something happens to me during delivery, if I can't be there to care for our daughter, please trust Emily. She knows what it is to love unconditionally, what it is to give everything for a child who isn't hers biologically. Her heart is broken, but it still has room to love. And Amber is going to need that kind of love. Julian's tears stained the paper as he read the final lines. Don't let the world tell you that love has to follow rules, that it has to come with certificates or university degrees. Sometimes the person who can help our children the most is the one we least expect. Sometimes angels arrive dressed as domestic employees. Trust your heart, my love. And if someday you find Emily caring for our daughter in a way you don't understand, don't judge her. Thank her, because she's giving what I can no longer give. A mother's unconditional love. With all my love, Teresa. P.S. In the envelope with this letter, you'll find Emily's phone number. Use it when you're ready to ask for forgiveness. Julian read the letter 3 times before his mind could fully process it. Teresa had known Emily. She had planned this. She had wanted Emily to care for Amber. The envelope Emily left in the kitchen was still in his desk. With trembling hands, he opened it. "Mr. Harrison, I understand why you had to fire me. Any father would have done the same. But I want you to know I never intended to harm Amber or confuse her. I lost my son a year ago, and when I saw your baby suffering, I could only act as a mother. Your wife, Teresa, told me a lot about you during my pregnancy. She told me you were a good man who had forgotten how to show his feelings. She asked me that, if something happened to her, I would take care of your family in whatever way I could. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you understand that all I wanted was for Amber to feel the love her mother can no longer give her. She reminded me so much of my Matthew. I just wanted her to be happy. If you ever change your mind, I'll be at Corner Cafe on Madison Avenue 147 every Tuesday at 4 p.m. It's where Teresa and I used to meet. With respect and love, Emily. Julian remained motionless for long minutes, with both letters in his hands. Amber's crying had ceased. She had finally fallen asleep from exhaustion, but the house's silence felt heavier than ever. Teresa had orchestrated all of this. She had known the future, had felt she wouldn't be there, and had put Emily in his path as a posthumous gift. And he, blinded by class prejudices and others' opinions, had rejected that gift. He approached his study window. New York sparkled under the nightlights, a city of 8 million people where two broken souls had found each other to heal one another, and he had separated them. For the first time since Teresa's death, Julian cried. He cried for his wife, for his daughter, for Emily, for the son she had lost, for all the opportunities for love the world wastes out of fear, out of pride, out of stupid rules that dictate who can love whom and in what way. He cried until dawn painted the sky golden, until Amber woke up and started crying again, until he knew exactly what he had to do. It was Tuesday. It was 3:45 p.m. Emily would be waiting. But could Julian repair the damage he had caused? Corner Cafe was exactly the opposite of Julian Harrison's world. Worn wooden tables, red checkered tablecloths, the aroma of homemade coffee mixing with that of fresh apple pie. A place where common people made important decisions with modest budgets. Julian entered dressed in a suit that cost more than most customers' monthly salary. Conversations stopped briefly. It wasn't common to see a businessman of his caliber in a neighborhood cafe, but quickly resumed. New York is a city that respects the privacy of its love and heartbreak stories. Emily was sitting at a back table with a cold coffee between her hands and her eyes fixed on the door. She had been coming every Tuesday for a month, waiting for a conversation that seemed impossible. When she saw Julian enter, she felt neither surprise nor relief. Only deep sadness for everything that had been lost in those 4 weeks. "Mr. Harrison," she stood respectfully. "Emily," he replied, gesturing toward the chair. "Please sit down and call me Julian." They sat facing each other, separated by a small table that felt like an abyss. Julian had rehearsed this moment during the entire trip, but now that he was here, words escaped him. "I read Teresa's letter," he finally began. "And your letter, too." Emily nodded slowly. "How is Amber?" The question was like a dagger. Julian looked down. "Bad. Very bad. She's gone back to how she was before you arrived. Worse, maybe." "I'm so sorry." "No." Julian looked up, and for the first time Emily saw tears in those blue eyes that had always been cold as ice. "You have nothing to be sorry about. I'm the one who has to apologize. I was a coward, prejudiced, a bad father. I fired you for doing what I didn't know how to do. Love my daughter." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing words she had dreamed of hearing. "I didn't know if I should tell you about Teresa. I didn't want you to think I was manipulating you." "Teresa planned it all, didn't she?" Julian smiled for the first time in weeks. "Even dead, she's still smarter than me. She told me you were a good man who had forgotten how to show his feelings." Emily repeated the exact words from the letter. "That you just needed someone to teach you again." They sat in silence for a moment, processing the complexity of the situation. Two strangers united by love for the same child, by the loss of irreplaceable people, by the possibility of a second chance. "Emily," Julian leaned forward, "I want to offer you work again, but not as a domestic employee, as Amber's caregiver, officially, with a dignified salary, with respect, with recognition that you're the person my daughter needs." Emily's eyes filled with tears. I don't know if it's a good idea. Dr. Lawson, the authorities?" "Screw the authorities," Julian responded with a vehemence that surprised both of them. Sorry for the language, but it's the truth. My daughter was happy with you for the first time in her life. That's all that matters. But Emily knew the world better than he did. She knew that class prejudices don't disappear with good intentions. Mr. Julian, she corrected herself, you don't understand. For people like Dr. Lawson, what I did is unforgivable. A domestic employee has no right to breastfeed her boss's child. They'll say I'm crazy, that I'm dangerous, that I manipulated the situation. Then we'll prove them wrong. But proving them wrong turned out to be harder than Julian had imagined. Dr. Helen Lawson didn't receive the news of Emily's return well. Her phone call that same Tuesday night was a declaration of social war. Julian, I understand you're desperate, but this is madness. Her voice sounded like cracking ice. That woman has created an emotional dependency in your daughter. You can't reward that behavior. Helen, my daughter is fine when Emily is near. That's all I need to know. Your daughter is confused. Helen's professional elegance was cracking. A domestic employee cannot substitute for the mother. It's grotesque, Julian. It's a violation of all social and professional norms. Social norms don't hug my daughter when she cries. This cannot continue. If you insist on this irresponsible decision, I'll be forced to report the situation to social services. A child of your social status cannot be in the care of an uneducated woman without preparation who acts on distorted maternal impulses. The threat was clear. Helen was willing to use all her professional prestige to separate Amber from Emily, and possibly from Julian too. Do what you have to do, Julian replied, surprising himself with his own firmness. But Emily returns to my house tomorrow. The war had begun. Friday morning, 2 social workers showed up at the Harrison mansion. Professional women, well-dressed, with folders full of forms and the authority of the state backing them. Mr. Harrison, we've received a complaint about inappropriate care of your minor daughter. We need to evaluate the situation immediately. Julian received them in his study, with Emily at his side and Amber sleeping peacefully in the latter's arms. The scene would have been perfectly normal if not for the tension that filled the air like electricity before a storm. What exactly is the nature of your complaint? Julian asked. The older social worker, a woman of about 50 with gold-framed glasses, read from her folder. It's alleged that Miss Emily Rivers has maintained inappropriate physical contact with minor Amber Harrison, specifically that she has breastfed her without medical or legal authorization, creating an emotional dependency harmful to the child's normal development. And what would be the proposed solution? Julian's voice was dangerously calm. Immediate separation of the minor from Miss Rivers, psychological evaluation of both parties, and possible temporary custody by social services while it's determined if you, Mr. Harrison, are capable of providing a safe environment for your daughter. Temporary custody. The words resonated in the room like a gunshot. They were threatening to take Amber away. Emily immediately stood up. If my presence is causing problems, I'll leave right now. I don't want Mr. Harrison to lose his daughter because of me. You're not going anywhere. Julian also stood up, his voice charged with an authority he had built during 20 years of business leadership. This is my house. This is my daughter, and this woman is here because I decided it. Mr. Harrison, the younger social worker intervened. We understand you're emotionally attached to Miss Rivers, but you must understand that your daughter's well-being is above any personal consideration. That's when Julian made the decision that would change everything. You want to see my daughter's well-being? He approached Emily and took Amber in his arms. The child immediately woke up and began to cry. Look at this, Amber cried with the desperation of the previous 6 months. Her little body tensed, her fists clenched, her face turned red. Julian rocked her, spoke to her softly, tried to console her, but nothing worked. After 5 minutes of uninterrupted crying, he gave the child back to Emily. The silence was instantaneous. Amber curled up against Emily's chest, her breathing calmed, her muscles relaxed. In less than 30 seconds, she was asleep again. "This is my daughter's well-being," Julian said, looking directly into the social worker's eyes. "This woman isn't confusing or manipulating her. She's giving her what she needs, unconditional love." The two women exchanged uncomfortable glances. The evidence before their eyes contradicted all their protocols, but it was undeniable. "Still," the older one insisted, "the method, the breastfeeding, is highly irregular." "Irregular according to whom?" Julian approached his desk and took out Teresa's letter. "My wife, who was a clinical psychologist, knew Emily and specifically asked her to care for our daughter if something happened to her." "Are you going to question a mother's last will?" He read parts of the letter aloud, especially the lines about trusting maternal instinct and not judging love by its unconventional forms. His voice broke reading Teresa's final words, but he didn't stop. "This is the authorization you need," he concluded. "A mother who knew Emily, who trusted her, who knew her daughter would be safe in her arms." The younger social worker approached to observe Amber sleeping. "Could we speak with Miss Rivers alone?" Emily nodded and followed the women to the main living room, with Amber still sleeping in her arms. For 20 minutes, she answered questions about her personal history, her motivations, her relationship with Teresa, her plans for the future. She told them about Matthew, about how he had died, about how her arms had remained empty for an entire year. She explained that breastfeeding Amber hadn't been a calculated decision, but an instinctive act of a mother who recognized the needs of a baby in danger. "And what happens if Mr. Harrison decides he no longer needs you?" the older worker asked. "If he remarries? If he has other children?" Emily smiled sadly. "Then I'll step away with dignity, knowing Amber is well. I'm not here to replace her biological mother. I'm here to give her what her mother can no longer give her, until she no longer needs it." The social workers left that afternoon without taking any immediate action, but promised to return for a more exhaustive evaluation. They had seen something that didn't fit in their procedure manuals: a genuinely happy and cared-for child, a father willing to fight for what was best for his daughter, and a woman whose love transcended social barriers. But the battle wasn't over. Helen Lawson wouldn't give up so easily. Could love win against the system, or would social rules be stronger than maternal instinct? The final confrontation came 3 weeks later, in the least expected place: the university hospital where Teresa had given birth to Amber. Dr. Helen Lawson had organized a multidisciplinary evaluation meeting, inviting pediatricians, child psychologists, social workers, and even a legal representative for the minor. Her objective was clear: to scientifically demonstrate that the relationship between Emily and Amber was harmful to the child's normal development. "Colleagues," Helen began in the hospital's lecture hall, dressed in a black suit that made her look more like a judge than a psychologist. "We have been convened to evaluate an extremely serious case of child emotional manipulation." She projected a PowerPoint presentation with graphs, statistics, and development theories. She spoke for 40 minutes about anomalous attachment bonds, maternal role confusion, and pathological emotional dependency. "Miss Rivers," she continued, pointing to a photo of Emily she had obtained somehow, "is a woman without professional education, with a history of traumatic loss that makes her psychologically unstable. Her behavior with minor Amber Harrison constitutes a projection of her own unresolved maternal deficiencies." The 20 professionals present nodded with serious expressions. The presentation was impeccable, academically sound, backed by years of studies and international protocols. "The conclusion is evident," Helen concluded. "This relationship must end immediately, and the minor must be placed under specialized professional care to reverse the emotional damage caused." When she finished, the room erupted in murmurs of approval. Several doctors congratulated Helen on her exhaustive analysis. The legal representative took notes to proceed with immediate separation. That's when the back door of the lecture hall opened. Julian entered with Amber in his arms, followed by Emily. They had been invited as study subjects, but weren't expected to speak. However, Julian had decided it was time for the truth to be heard. "Dr. Lawson," his voice resonated in the lecture hall with the authority of someone accustomed to directing important meetings. "May I ask a question?" Helen visibly tensed. "Julian, this is a professional evaluation. It's not appropriate for—" "How many children have you had, doctor?" The question fell on the room like a silent bomb. Helen was speechless for a moment. That's irrelevant to my professional capacity." "None." Julian approached the podium with Amber restless in his arms. "Then all your experience about what a child needs comes from books, from theories, from cases you observe from the outside. Mr. Harrison, I remind you that you're in a medical institution, and you remind me that you're evaluating my daughter without really knowing her." Julian addressed the entire room. "How many of you have seen Amber before today? How many have observed how she reacts with different people? How many have been parents who have lost sleep for months without knowing how to console your own child?" An uncomfortable silence filled the lecture hall. The professionals realized they were judging a situation they knew only through second-hand reports. "Allow me to show you something," Julian continued. "This is my testimony as a father." For the next 10 minutes, Julian tried to calm Amber using all the techniques he had learned in 18 months of solitary parenting. He rocked her, sang to her softly, changed her position, offered her his finger to grab. But Amber became increasingly restless until she began to cry with the intensity all the professionals present recognized as problematic. "Now," Julian said, approaching Emily, "allow me to show you what you call emotional manipulation." He handed the child to Emily. The change was instantaneous and dramatic. Amber stopped crying immediately, her body relaxed, and in less than a minute she was smiling while playing with a strand of Emily's hair. The contrast was so evident that several doctors leaned forward to observe better. "Is this pathological?" Julian asked the room. "A child who stops suffering and begins to smile is evidence of manipulation?" The doctor who directed the hospital's pediatrics, an older woman with decades of experience, stood slowly. "Mr. Harrison, could you ask Miss Rivers to come closer?" Emily approached the podium, with Amber comfortable in her arms. The doctor observed her for several minutes, noting the natural way she held the child, how she anticipated her needs, how she responded to her sounds and movements. "How many children have you had, miss?" the doctor asked. "One," Emily responded with a trembling voice. "Matthew. He died a year and a half ago." "And did you breastfeed your son?" "For 8 months. Until the day he died." The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "And when did you begin breastfeeding Amber?" "When she was 6 months old and couldn't stop crying. My breasts responded to her crying as if she were my own child. It wasn't a planned decision. It was instinct." The room was completely silent. Even Helen had stopped taking notes. "Dr. Lawson," the pediatrician addressed Helen, "in your presentation you mentioned this relationship is anomalous. But have you considered that maybe what's anomalous is that a 6-month-old child had to suffer so long without finding the comfort she needed?" Helen straightened defensively. "Protocols exist for a reason. We cannot allow just anyone without professional training." "Professional training?" a voice interrupted from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see an older woman, about 70, who had entered silently. She wore a white coat with the name Dr. Carmen Wright, Director Emeritus, embroidered on the chest. "Dr. Wright," Helen paled. Carmen Wright was a legend at the hospital, a pediatrician who had dedicated 50 years to caring for children and had trained most of the doctors present. "I've been listening from outside," said Dr. Wright, walking slowly toward the podium. "And I have a very simple question for all of you. When did we forget that medicine exists to serve life, not to create protocols that complicate it?" She addressed Emily directly. "Young woman, may I hold the child?" Emily carefully handed Amber to her. Dr. Wright held her with the expertise of decades, observing her reactions, her breathing, her color, her muscle tone. "This child is perfectly healthy," she announced after 5 minutes. More than that, she's flourishing. Her motor development is excellent, her weight is ideal, her reflexes are normal. If this is an emotionally manipulated child, then we should teach emotional manipulation in medical schools. She returned the child to Emily and addressed the entire room. Colleagues, I've seen thousands of cases of child abuse, neglect, emotional abuse. I've seen children destroyed by biological parents, damaged by professional caregivers, traumatized by systems that prioritize rules over well-being. But never, in 50 years of career, have I seen a child more clearly loved and cared for than this one. She pointed toward Emily. This woman isn't projecting her traumas onto this child. She's channeling her maternal love toward where it's most needed. And any protocol that prevents that isn't protecting the child. It's harming her. She addressed Helen specifically. Dr. Lawson, I respect your education and experience, but let me remind you of something you may have forgotten in your years of theory. Children don't need protocols. They need love. And love doesn't come with professional certifications. The room had fallen completely silent. Several doctors exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing they had been about to separate a child from the person who clearly cared for her best. But Helen wouldn't give up so easily. She stood with a cold smile. Doctor, right, with all respect, your perspective is clouded by sentimentalism. This situation sets a dangerous precedent. If we allow domestic employees to breastfeed their employers' children, where do we draw the line? What prevents any woman with psychological problems from deciding she can help other people's children? That's when Julian pulled an envelope from his jacket's inner pocket. Dr. Lawson, he said with a calm that chilled the blood. There's something you don't know about this situation. He opened the envelope and took out several documents. These are my wife Teresa's medical records during her pregnancy. Records showing she and Emily met right here, in this hospital, during her prenatal visits. He began to read. Prenatal therapy session, March 15th. Patient Teresa Harrison reports significant anxiety about her maternal capacity. Contact with other mothers for emotional support is recommended. Signed by Dr. Helen Lawson. A murmur ran through the room. Helen had turned pale. Follow-up session, March 22nd. Patient has established a therapeutic friendship with Emily Rivers, single mother who recently lost her child. This relationship is providing the emotional support the patient needed. Signed by Dr. Helen Lawson. Julian looked up at Helen, whose eyes had filled with panic. Last session, April 10th. Patient Teresa Harrison requests that, in case of delivery complications, Emily Rivers be contacted for emotional support of the baby and husband. Signed by Dr. Helen Lawson. The silence in the room was deafening. Helen had known the relationship between Teresa and Emily. She had approved that relationship. She had officially documented that Teresa wanted Emily involved in her daughter's care. Dr. Lawson, Julian's voice was dangerously soft. Would you like to explain why you so radically changed your professional opinion about a relationship you yourself had documented as therapeutically beneficial? Helen opened and closed her mouth several times like a fish out of water. Her entire academic presentation, all her arguments about protocols and professionalism, crumbled before the evidence of her own hypocrisy. Circumstances have changed. Teresa is no longer... Exactly. Julian moved closer to the podium. Teresa is no longer here, but her will, medically documented by you yourself, was for Emily to care for our daughter. You're fighting against the explicit wishes of a dying mother, documented in your own medical files. The hospital director stood slowly. Dr. Lawson, are these documents authentic? Helen nodded weakly, all her professional arrogance evaporating. Then this evaluation is over, the director declared. Mr. Harrison, Miss Rivers, you may leave. There will be no legal action against you. In fact, I apologize on behalf of the hospital for this situation. But Julian wasn't finished. He addressed the entire room of professionals. I want all of you to remember this moment. His voice resonated with an authority built during decades of leadership. Today you almost destroyed an innocent child's life by following protocols instead of following your hearts. You almost separated a daughter from the woman who loves her unconditionally out of fear of what your colleagues would say. He pointed toward Amber, who slept peacefully in Emily's arms. This child lost her biological mother, but found another mother in the least expected person. A woman who had lost her own child and had love left over to give. A woman who responded to a baby's cry with her purest maternal instinct. His voice softened, filling with emotion. My wife Teresa knew this would happen. She knew the world would try to separate our daughter from the person who could best care for her. That's why she documented her wishes medically. That's why she trusted I would be smart enough to recognize the gift she had left us. He looked directly at Helen. Dr. Lawson, you knew my wife. You know she was a brilliant professional, a competent psychologist, a woman who didn't make decisions lightly. When she chose Emily to care for our daughter, she didn't do it out of sentimentalism. She did it because she recognized in this woman something no university degree can teach. Authentic maternal love. He approached Emily and put his hand on her shoulder. Emily isn't here as a domestic employee. She's here as my daughter's second mother, as the woman Teresa chose to continue her legacy of maternal love. And anyone who tries to separate my family again will have to face me. The lecture hall had fallen into complete silence. Several doctors had tears in their eyes. Dr. Carmen Wright smiled with pride. Even the social workers who had arrived with folders full of separation forms now quietly put them away. Helen Lawson slowly gathered her papers, her professional prestige destroyed before her own colleagues. As she passed by Julian, she stopped for a moment. Teresa would have been proud of you, she murmured, so low only he could hear her. You finally learned to fight for what you love. She left the lecture hall without looking back, knowing her career at the hospital was over. But maybe, for the first time in years, she had done the right thing by recognizing her mistake. When Julian, Emily, and Amber left the hospital that afternoon, something had changed forever. They had not only won the legal right to be an unconventional family, they had proven that authentic love is more powerful than any protocol, wiser than any theory, stronger than any social prejudice. In the parking lot, under the golden sky of the New York sunset, Julian stopped and looked at Emily. I have something to ask you, he said with a seriousness she hadn't seen before. Emily felt her heart racing. Had he changed his mind? Had he realized all this fighting had been too complicated? What last name do you want Amber to use when she learns to talk? The question caught her completely off guard. Excuse me? Amber Harrison sounds good, Julian continued. But Amber Harrison Rivers sounds like a girl who has two mothers who love her. One who brought her into the world, and another who saved her from pain. Tears ran down Emily's cheeks as she understood what he was proposing. He wasn't just accepting her as a caregiver, but as a legal mother, as true family. Are you sure? She whispered. The world will talk. They'll say it's weird, that it's not normal. Let them talk. Julian smiled for the first time in months with genuine joy. Teresa taught me that normalcy is overrated. What matters is love. Amber chose that perfect moment to wake up and smile, as if she had understood the entire conversation. I think she agrees, Emily laughed, wiping away her tears. Then it's decided, Julian extended his hand toward Emily. Do you want to officially be the second mother of Amber Harrison Rivers? Emily took his hand, feeling her broken heart finally beginning to heal. Yes, she responded. Forever. Corner Cafe had changed a lot in 3 years. The worn wooden tables were now accompanied by special high chairs for children, and the menu included organic smoothies alongside traditional coffee. But it remained the same place where complicated love stories found resolution between cups of coffee with milk and knowing smiles. Emily entered every Tuesday at 4 p.m., but she no longer came alone. Amber, now 3.5 years old, ran between the tables with the confidence of a child who knows herself deeply loved. Her brown curls bounced with each step, and her blue eyes shone with the joy of someone who had never known abandonment. "Grandma Carmen!" she shouted every time she saw the cafe owner, an older woman who had adopted this irregular little family as if they were her own grandchildren. "My princess!" Carmen responded, picking up Amber and covering her with kisses. "How is my favorite granddaughter?" "Mommy Emily taught me to braid." Amber proudly pointed to her hair, where several strands were styled with the infinite patience that only mothers have. "And where is your daddy?" Carmen asked, though she already knew the answer. "Working, but he's coming soon," Amber responded with the naturalness of a child who had learned that love doesn't depend on being together every minute, but on knowing you can always count on the people you love. Julian arrived exactly at 4:30 when his workday ended. He no longer worked until 10 p.m. like before. He had learned that business success without family love was an empty victory. "How are my two favorite women?" he always asked, kissing Emily first and then picking up Amber, who clung to his neck like a little koala. "Daddy, Mommy Emily says we're going to the park after coffee today." "Mommy Emily says that?" Julian looked at Emily with that smile he had learned to give freely after years of keeping it hidden. "Then we're going to the park." They sat at the back table, the same one where 3 years ago they had had the conversation that changed their lives. Amber drew in her coloring books while Emily and Julian planned the week, talked about work, shared those everyday moments that build a real family. Emily had finished her degree in early childhood education, studying at night while Amber slept. She now worked part-time at a neighborhood daycare, but her main job remained being the mother Amber needed. Julian had sold part of his pharmaceutical company to found the Teresa Harrison Foundation, a support center for single mothers that he had put under Emily's direction. The center offered free child care, psychological support, and job training for women in vulnerable situations. Teresa would have been proud, Dr. Carmen Wright had told him during the inauguration. "You found a way to turn your pain into purpose." But the real miracle wasn't in professional projects or legal victories. It was in those simple moments at Corner Cafe when Amber fell asleep in Emily's lap while Julian read the newspaper aloud. When the three of them walked through Central Park on Sunday mornings, when Amber woke them up on Saturdays by jumping on the matrimonial bed that Emily and Julian now shared. It had taken them 2 years to become a romantic couple. Love had come slowly, built on the solid foundation of mutual respect, shared purpose, and the certainty that both would always put Amber's well-being above everything else. "Do you regret it?" Julian had asked Emily the night before officially moving into the Harrison mansion, which now felt like a true home instead of an elegant mausoleum. "Regret what?" she had responded, packing Amber's toys in boxes for the move. "Not having had a normal love story. Without complications, without losses, without legal battles." Emily had smiled, that smile she had learned to give again after a year of mourning. "Normal stories are boring. We have something better. A real story." And it was true. Their love had been born from pain, had grown in adversity, had been tested by society, and had emerged stronger. It wasn't the love of fairy tales, but it was the love of real life, complicated, imperfect, and absolutely unbreakable. At Corner Cafe, while Amber drew a family of 3 people with bright colors, Emily looked at Julian and realized there was something she needed to tell him. "Do you know what day it is today?" she asked him. Julian frowned, mentally reviewing his calendar. "Tuesday, October 15th. "Why?" "Exactly 4 years ago, Teresa and I met at the hospital. 3 years ago, you came here for the first time to ask my forgiveness. 2 years ago, Amber said her first complete word." "Which was?" Julian asked, though he already knew the answer. "Mommy," Emily whispered, watching as Amber continued drawing, oblivious to the adults' conversation. "She didn't specify which one of us," Julian laughed. "Very smart of her." "And 1 year ago," Emily continued, taking Julian's hand over the table, "you proposed to me at this same table." "And?" Julian looked at her with curiosity. "And I think it's time to tell you yes." The silence that followed was different from all previous silences. It wasn't the silence of pain, or fear, or uncertainty. It was the silence of happy surprise, of decisions made with a complete heart. "Really?" Julian whispered. "Really?" Amber looked up from her drawing at the exact moment Julian kissed Emily, as if she had been waiting for that moment to complete her artwork. "Look!" she shouted, showing her drawing. "We're a family!" On the paper, with imperfect strokes of colored crayons, she had drawn 3 figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Above, with crooked but legible letters, she had written, "My family." Carmen, the cafe owner, approached with tears in her eyes. "Can I keep it?" she asked, pointing to the drawing. "To hang it there, next to the other photos of happy families." While Carmen hung the drawing on the cafe's memory wall, Julian hugged Emily and Amber, feeling his life finally made complete sense. Teresa had been right from the beginning. Love always finds a way, even when that path is full of obstacles, prejudices, and legal battles. Even when it arrives dressed as a domestic employee, carrying her own pain, with empty arms waiting to be filled again. Outside Corner Cafe, New York continued its accelerated pace. 8 million people lived their own stories of love and heartbreak, of loss and reunion, of families formed in the most unexpected ways. But inside, at that back table that had witnessed so many important conversations, an unconventional family had found their happy ending. It wasn't the ending of fairy tales, where everything is perfect from the first moment. It was the ending of real life, where love is built day by day, where families are formed with intention and sacrifice, where happiness is conquered by fighting against a world that sometimes doesn't understand that true love doesn't have just one form. As they left the cafe that afternoon, with Amber skipping between them, holding both her parents' hands, Emily realized there was something Teresa had understood from the beginning. Angels don't always arrive with wings. Sometimes they arrive in domestic employee uniforms, with broken hearts that still have room to love, with maternal instincts that recognize children who need to be saved. And when those angels find the families they're destined to form, it doesn't matter what the world says. It doesn't matter how many legal battles must be fought. It doesn't matter how many protocols must be broken. Love always wins. Because sometimes, the person you most need in your life is the one you least expected to find. And when you find her, all you can do is thank destiny for putting an angel in your path, even if that angel arrived dressed completely differently than you had imagined. Did this story move you? Give it a like and subscribe for more stories that prove true love has no boundaries. Comment: what would you have done in Julian's place?